Demonstration nugget, using the client library. Hello everybody, this is Ben Finkel, and in this nugget I'm going to show you how you can use the Python client library in order to administer your Google Cloud SQL instances. Now this is distinct and separate from using a client library like MySQLDB or the MySQL connector, because those libraries allow you to actually execute SQL commands against your databases, right? Insert data, select data, etc. Here we're talking about administering your instances from, in this case, Python. The most valuable resource that you're going to find when you want to work with the Google API Client Library is their documentation right online here at developers.google.com /API-client-library. I'm focused on the Python version because that's what we're talking about in this nugget, but they have a different version for whatever programming language you happen to be working in. This has a real good getting started documentation, some reference and samples. We're going to start taking a look at the installation here. And the installation for Python is actually really easy. We're just going to use the pip utility. If you're not familiar with pip and the Python package index, check out the CBT Nuggets course on Python. This stuff is very easy to use. I'm going to go ahead and run it under a sudo. Let it install, and this is going to install the API client library for me inside of my Python library, so I have access to it from code. Now once that's done, you can start writing your code and using this library, and let's take a look at my sample code here. It can look a little daunting and a little confusing at first, but that's because we have to deal with the OAuth flow in order to get authorization to execute whatever commands against the project that we want to execute. Let's take a few minutes to talk a little bit about OAuth. The OAuth 2.0 flow, or the OAuth 2.0 dance as it's sometimes called, can be difficult to get your head around at first, and you can see all the errors flying back and forth here. Here's the basic idea though with how it works. There's some application, it might be your application as it is in this example, it might be anyone's application, wants to access some third-party service. That third-party service, in this case Google Cloud SQL, needs to verify with you, the user, first before it can do so. You've actually worked with this in the past. If you've ever had a piece of software or an app on your tablet maybe that wanted to post to Facebook on your behalf, right? And the way it works is it tells you that it's going to do that, but then it launches a page, and the page actually has Facebook saying, hey, this app would like to post on Facebook on your behalf. Is that allowed? And you click yes, authorize it, it's allowed. And then from that point forward, that application is allowed to post things onto your Facebook page for you, or tweet things to your Twitter account for you, or whatever you authorized it to do. Well, that's OAuth 2.0. You just maybe didn't know that's what was happening. Here we are replicating that process with our Google Cloud SQL instances. So what happens is the application that we're going to write has to first request access from the Google server. Once it's been granted access, it's going to get an authorization code, and then it uses that authorization code to get an access code. These are also called tokens. They can be a little bit confusing, authorization and access. They both kind of sound similar, but they perform different functions. The authorization code is exchanged for an access token, and that access token has to be used with every API call to verify that the client, in this case the app, is in fact allowed to do what it's being, or what it's trying to do, that it has authorization to do what it's trying to do. If you want to get into the nitty-gritty details of how the OAuth 2 flow works, take a look at the RESTful API nugget that I recorded, the demonstration nugget on using the REST API inside of the Google Cloud SQL course. But for our purposes, we're going to take advantage of the client library that we're using here, which really abstracts out a lot of this process for us. It gives us a few simple commands like flow from client secrets and credentials.authorize that allow us to build the services and authorize the services that we need without a lot of the nitty-gritty. It's all in this OAuth 2 client library as well as the API client library that we just downloaded and installed. Of course, to make all of this work, what we're going to need right off the bat are client secrets, or basically credentials for the account that we're trying to log in as. And we create those out on our cloud.google.com console. So I'm going to go here, log into my console, select the GSQL Nuggets project. You've got to choose the project that you're working in. And on the left-hand navigation pane, choose credentials underneath APIs and auth. What we're going to do here is we're going to create a new client ID. This is basically the ID that our application is going to log in as. So before our application can even request access, it's got to be whitelisted inside of our project. I'm just going to choose installed application, leave it as other, click create client ID, and it's going to build this client ID for me. It's very, very quick. And you can see that what it gives me here is a client ID, which is like a username, and a client secret. I'm going to go ahead and click download JSON because I want this in a JSON file. And then what I need to do is copy that into the same script or the same folder as my Python script. So having done that and renamed it to client_secrets.json, because that's what I refer to it up here in my Python code, client_secrets.json. If you want, we can take a look at it real quick here. Let's go open client_secrets.json. So you can see it's a little JSON file with all that information that was just up there on screen, but now it's buried in this poorly formatted JSON file that's tough to read. I'm not going to worry about that too much, though. So now that we have our client secrets stored locally, we can take a look at the rest of our code, and the majority of the work is being done inside of this function here called getAuthenticated_service. This entire function, getAuthenticated_service, came from the Google documentation. Let's just talk through it real quick. We use the flow from client secrets command, passing in the client secrets file and the scope that was passed into my function to begin with in order to create this flow object. So now I got this flow object, set that aside, we use that in a second. The second thing I do is I create a credential storage object here, and then I call a get against it in order to see if it's equal to none or not. In other words, it's asking if it's non-existent or if it's invalid, because we may already have credentials. We may have already gotten a good access token. If we've gotten a token recently and it's not yet expired, we don't need to re-get a new token. There's no reason to do this again. We can just simply reuse those credentials. So if we have one and it's good, this next command will get skipped. If it's none or invalid, then we run OAuth 2 with our flow and our credential storage. So it will pass in our client secrets, request access to the scope, and it will store the results inside of our credential storage, which is just another JSON file that I'm going to end up storing right here in the same script as my Python command. Once I've got it, I authorize my HTTP object, return the results of this discovery build command. Again, the details of what's going on here is all very clear inside of the Google documentation. That page that I showed you off the top of this nugget, you're going to want to make sure you check that out. And that's really 90% of the work in order to make the client library work. You can see there's a couple more command lines down here. I've got my call to the getAuthenticated_service function, and I pass in the scope that I need. I'll show you in a moment in the documentation where you can find this information. And then I simply call the service.instances, in this case the .list command, which is going to list all the instances inside of my project. I pass in as the project Sunlit Pipe 768, dump the results out into JSON. Let's go ahead and take a look at this in action. I'm just going to open up my terminal window, and I will run python lib.py. So again, I've got both my script as well as my client secrets in this folder. Execute this. You see the first thing it does is it pops up the OAuth 2 authorization page. It's saying, hey, do you want to authorize this? I say accept. Yes, I do. And now it says the authentication flow is completed. If I go back to my command line, I can see that it got my listing out here. And if I scroll up, I can also see, yep, authentication successful, constructing service, and then here it pumped out the list command that I asked for. So documentation for the scopes that you need to request, in this case SQLService.admin, or the actual function calls that I'm making, like instances.list, can of course be found out here on Google's site. I'll just open up a new tab here and go to cloud.google.com, whack SQL, whack docs, whack admin API, and you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff here. To begin with, on my overall introduction page, if I scroll down, I can see the scopes that I might need to request access to. And here's SQLService.admin. That gets me read-write access to the Cloud SQL admin dashboard. You can see below there's actually a second scope called Cloud-Platform that if I want to use instances.import or export, I'm going to need those. As far as the reference for the actual commands itself, that's here up under API reference. So if I look at instances, what did I call? I called list. Simply select this here, and you can see that I had to pass in project as a string. I could have also passed in max results or page token if I wanted to paginate my results. So all that information, all that documentation is out here available on Google's website. Once again, I recommend you bookmark all of these pages and save them to keep them as a handy reference guide. That concludes this nugget on using the client library. So we took a look at how you can abstract out the OAuth 2 authorization flow, the requesting and submission of access tokens, using the OAuth 2 client library that's part of the client library that Google SDK includes. We also took a look at some of the various documentation sources that are available so that you can understand fully how to use this library if you need to. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.